This bonus episode of Fiction Fans contains conversations about explicit sexual content. If that's not for you, we'll see you next week. If it is, welcome.
Hello, and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah. And for this bonus episode, we are so thrilled to have the wonderful Krystle Matar, author of Legacy of the Brightwash and just all-around wonderful person.
Hi, I'm Krystle. It's really nice to be here to talk about smut.
Yes.
I have been looking forward to this episode since the inception of this podcast, so I have a lot of pent-up energy. Well, as always, we like to start with a bit of sunshine at the beginning of the episode. So, Sarah, what's something good that happened this week?
Well, my something good is a little bit of a cheat because it's having Krystle on the podcast. I'm just so excited to actually, we've been talking via Twitter for quite some time now, and so it's such a thrill to have you on.
I guess my something good is definitely being on a podcast with you guys. That's pretty awesome. And then the contest Spiffbo opened yesterday, which is the self-published fantasy blog off. 300 self-published fantasy books go into a bunch of bloggers, and
one comes out.
Yeah, one comes out the winner, but there's 10 finalists.
Oh, cool.
So being a finalist is a pretty big deal itself. So it feels a bit to me like 300 go in and 10 come out because the finalist spot is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But so that started. So this is a nice distraction instead of worrying about whether or not I actually made it in, which I'm sure I did because I did the Google form. But it was a nice thing, but it was a stressful thing. But it was a nice thing, but it was a stressful thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My nice thing is maybe not as complex, but also has its ups and downs.
Yes.
I got sunburnt yesterday, which is terrible, except it means there was enough sun to get burnt by. Yeah, exactly. And I spent time in it. So yay.
Outside.
I know. Oh, what a novelty.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, have you read anything good lately?
I have been reading Fortune's Fool by Angela Board, which I'm really, really enjoying. I have not spent a lot of time with it because I'm reading it as an ebook, and I don't give as much priority to ebooks as I do to physical books. So I'm about 15% of the way through, I think, but I love it so far. We're going to be discussing the prequel novella later on the podcast at some point. It's on our calendar. So yeah.
That makes me really happy. Angela is a very dear friend of mine, and so is Bjorn. So seeing you guys go through all my friends' books is
yes,
it's working.
It is working.
Yeah. Once one of us gets in, then we kind of drag the rest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But they're very good books. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's not a hard dip.
Yeah, no. It's great. It's great to see you guys enjoying it.
How about you, Krystle? Have you been doing much reading or all writing all the time?
Most of my reading is beta reading, so stuff for my other friends. And I just finished Angela Board's next book, which is not connected to Fortune's Fool. It's its own series, its own universe. It's just like a fresh start. So she'll be publishing both series at the same time, which is super ambitious. And I guess she's pitching it as soap opera fantasy because of all the messy relationships, and then it's portal fantasy because portals, and then it's like the magic system is based on quantum physics, and there's Cold War elements to it. It's super complex but really amazing. And I'm pretty sure I didn't say anything she already has, so I'm pretty sure I'm not in trouble, but I'm really excited to be able to say more eventually soon.
I want that.
Yeah,
yes.
Right?
please give it to me.
No one's gonna want my book. There's so many complicated emotions and messy relationships. I'm like, Angela,
you don't understand. Yeah.
More. So yeah, I think it's going to do really well, and I'm excited to watch her go through all the next steps. And I've seen the cover, so it's going to go blow people away. So that's what I've been reading.
It sounds fantastic.
It is.
And Lily?
Oh, my answer is not nearly as exciting as either of those. I recently reread a fan fiction that I just keep coming back to. It's called Invent Any Version of Reality by Alice Volat Propius. I probably pronounced semi-okay. But this is an author who does a ton of AU teen wolf porn. And it's like, she's an amazing writer. But this one it's a multiple reality fic with all of her different AU versions, like meeting each other. So it's a very fun crossover. It's absurd. It's a wild ride in every definition of the phrase. And it's just so fun. I find myself coming back to it over and over again.
I think you've mentioned it to me before.
I probably have.
Yeah.
That's very memorable.
Yeah. You know, you find an author sometimes and you're like, oh, I'm going to read everything you've ever written. And that's just one of those. It clicks sometimes. Well, that sort of segues well into the topic of today's discussion, which is pornography.
Wait, are we not talking about what we're drinking?
Oh, did we not do that yet? Sorry, I've been drinking.
We have not done that yet, no.
Hashtag World Whiskey Day.
Yeah. Happy World Whiskey Day. I am drinking a Kentucky bourbon, Basil Hayden's. I know I'm the odd man out. I'm not a Scotch drinker, but I figured you'd forgive me.
I'm an equal opportunity whiskey drinker. Like anything goes.
Oh, good.
Sarah has much more discerning tastes than I do.
Well, it's basically everything that's not Scotch, and even some Scotch, is just too sweet for me. So it's not that I have discerning tastes, it's just that I have a very limited palate.
Oh, see, I have a horrible sweet tooth, so I'm all about bourbon.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I kind of gave it away. Sarah, what could you possibly be drinking today?
I wonder what. I'm drinking whiskey in honor of both World Whiskey Day and Krystle being with us. It is a Bruichladdich that's bottled by an independent bottler. It's very good.
I'm drinking beer. I kind of fell down on that. But in light of Brightwash and booze, it still works because it's a stout.
It still works. And I think this makes you the first person to drink beer on our podcast.
It's true.
Trailblazing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's an oatmeal stout from a Ontario craft brewery, so it's quite good, and it's disappearing fast. So I'll probably be doing whiskey next.
Okay, now we can talk about porn.
Now the segue, yeah.
There will have already been a warning before this, but just to reiterate, we will be discussing sexually explicit content in this episode. If that's not for you, we totally understand. We'll see you next time. This is your chance to turn off the episode. Stay at your own risk. Well, I think we should start at the beginning and sort of talk about how we started reading smut, porn, erotica, romance, whatever you want to call it.
Sexually explicit content.
Yeah.
Really good question, because I don't remember what came first. Like, for me, the writing it or reading it. I guess I must have read it somewhere, but I think it started because I was reading Anne Rice as a young person.
Anne Rice.
Yeah.
Love her. That's great. I don't love her. I love her work. There we go.
This is a judgment-free zone.
Since then, I've learned that she really hates fan fiction, so I'm kind of turned my little heart cold pretty fast.
Yeah.
I can't say that I actually wrote any for her stuff because she's got it covered. I didn't need to, but for me, I was taking in content, video games and movies and books, and there just weren't any queer characters anywhere. At a young age, I already knew that was a part of my identity, so I just filled in the blanks. And anytime anyone glanced at anyone, even remotely made eye contact, that was the signal. Okay, they are queer. I can make that content. And off I shot. So, and then that led me to the fan fiction community. I think that's the order in which it happened. Yeah, that's how I started.
Very cool. Sarah, do you want me to go next, or do you have your answer prepared?
I have my answer prepared. So I think that I started out reading smut like in books at a very young age. My mother put some probably inappropriate material in front of me.
Sarah, I think This is why we get along so well.
Exactly. So I think that the first things that I read that probably had explicit content was like The Mists of Avalon or Shogun by James Clavell. The only thing I remember about Shogun is that, well, two things. A, I hated it. And B, I hated it because he described pubic hair as like the jade bush. And I was like, that is the worst description of anything ever. So then I moved on to things that I liked Mists of Avalon, but then I moved on to books that I enjoyed that also had other like sexually explicit content. Like I picked up a series called Convergence. Actually, no, Convergence is the name of the book. The series is called The Blending by Sharon Green. I picked it up at a used bookstore, and it turns out that sex plays quite a large part in it. And I think that's probably the first book that got me started on reading smutty stuff.
That's interesting. My start was definitely in the fan fiction realm, like Krystle. I had read books that had sex scenes, but they weren't tittillating. They were just
good, right?
Well, they weren't meant to be that in depth. They're just like, also then these characters hooked up, fade to black.
Yeah.
I think it was more of a slow saunter downwards in Harry Potter fan fiction. This was back when they were rated on a citrus scale, if anyone else remembers that.
Yep. The good old lime and lemon.
Oh,
yeah. I know, Krystle, took you a second.
Yeah, I didn't remember until you said lemon, and I was like, oh, yes.
Lemons,
oh,
yeah.
That brings me back.
I'd read a story, and then, you get caught in an internet hole, and you're just following link after link, and then they're getting a little bit dirtier each time, and it's just going, and here I am.
I just remember a story, and Lily, if you don't want to include this in the podcast, you can cut it out. But I remember a story. We were at your parents' house.
Oh, is this the cum story?
Yes. and we were in the same room as Lily's parents, and Lily was reading fan fiction
because they thought they were monitoring my internet history.
They thought,
yeah.
And she said, Sarah, I think they misspelled the word cum. And I was like, oh no, they didn't.
Yeah, you're the one who gave it away. You should have said, yeah, oh, that's definitely a misspelling. How silly.
And then her mother didn't appreciate that we were reading this.
They better not be listening. Oh no, I'll never hear the end of it.
It's too late now.
I mean, your mother probably is. She listens to the podcast.
Honestly, if she listens to this episode, that's on her. Like, anyway. I can't follow that. But how am I supposed to transition to any other topic other than just like cringing at my adolescent horror?
I mean, if it helps, I'm cringing at my adolescent horror too. Like I let you down there.
Cringing that you went and got involved and then tried to cover, but no.
Well,
more whiskey.
Yeah, hey, more whiskey. This is why we're drinking hard alcohol for this episode. Well, surprising no one, we have all continued to read smut since those illustrious beginnings. Are there any rare things that you wish there was more of?
I have a really silly answer for this.
Good.
And I'm going to out myself for having horrible taste. I wish there was more Harry Potter Tom Riddle explicit fan fiction. There's not enough of it.
There you go. If there's any fan fiction writers out there listening, that's your prompt.
Yeah, you know the way to my heart.
Yeah.
But it's like that enemies to lovers trope that I love so much.
Mm-hmm.
And also like Riddle is an attractive villain, and Voldemort is not attractive, but Tom Riddle, when he was Tom Riddle, tall and dark-haired and British, and it's...
Now, would you call him a trash villain?
Yes, I would call him a trash villain.
Had to clarify.
Aren't they all, like, what constitutes a not trash villain? Like, what...
Nobody knows.
Yeah.
for me, I think trash villain, it's a term of endearment and it's very subjective, right? It's basically just a villain that I like and find attractive. Is about as good as I can get the description to be.
That's fair.
Again, no one ever said I had good taste.
That's actually very true.
I mean, villains have been we've been standing villains for a long time. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Hot Lucifer.
I was just about to say that.
in Liège. So, and it's like, what, 400, 500, 600 years old? I check my history. That's probably all wrong. But like,
yeah,
if they're trying to make it something that's not appealing, I think they fail.
It's interesting how the hot dude villains are so different from hot lady villains. I feel like a lot of times hot lady villains, their sex appeal is part of what makes them villainous. The seductress.
Yes, it's moral. It's the tie to female morality is disconnected from female sexuality. You can't have both, is the implication, and that's a whole other rant.
But it is interesting how male villains are able to be incidentally hot instead of that being what makes them a villain. Because I was trying to think of Circe in the Odyssey is the one that she's in, right?
Yeah.
She's a lady villain who's all about seducing the hero.
Well, and sirens and succubus and the list goes on. And then it's almost not even incidental for the men. It's like their villainy is part of the attraction. It's like it's presented as a quality, which, I mean, whatever.
But it's a different cause and effect, right? Their villainy makes them attractive instead of their attractiveness making them villains.
Yeah.
See, we can have smart discussions about porn. It's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's just the implication that you can't have an intelligent conversation about sex and enjoying sex and consenting to sex and seeking out sex. It's like, sorry guys, they go together. There's intelligence involved in a lot of that. It's not like, give me a break a little bit. So yeah, soapbox, off the soapbox. But yeah.
No, I think that's part of the reason why erotica appeals to me personally more than, video pornography.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is pornography that has amazing cinematography, but when you're reading erotica, there's also the potentially beautiful prose and character development and so many other things that go into it that you get to enjoy on top of the down and dirty details.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for me personally, like, there's always the discussion, you see it a lot online, how much sex can you handle in your book, and when is it okay to put the sex on the page, or should you fade to black? And at least for publishing, no other action scene is talked about in the same way. No other conflict, no other enjoyment, like, except maybe eating, is talked about in the same way as a sex scene. And why would me putting on the page imply that somehow I'm less skilled as an author? Like, you wouldn't say that about a battle scene. Like, why is it okay for people to go to a fantasy novel or a horror novel hoping for people to kill each other? And if you cut away from that battle scene, people will flame you, and they are right to do so because you built up to it and then cut away. But sex, oh, well, that's trashy.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think that's part of why I wanted to include it as a topic in the podcast as a whole. I mean, still quarantining it, because if people are uncomfortable with it, I totally understand. Yeah. But
yeah, that's the different.
It's the same way that we would quarantine, graphic discussions of people getting their limbs chopped off.
Violence or swearing.
Yeah.
And I get that there's a sliding scale on comfort for people, and there's a sliding scale on interest, and to each their own. But the implication that including one thing over another thing equals bad, that's what bugs me.
Well, and the idea that it can't be art is very small-minded. But so that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I'm not ashamed that I read it.
I'm not ashamed that I read it.
Let's admit it. So actually, how does being a reader of smut, well, I guess actually it sounds like you might have started writing it, but what is that balance like, being both a creator and consumer of erotica?
You have to remember that not all writers are interested in the same things, and not all writers are trying to say the same things. And you got to I have to filter it through that knowledge of, just because I would do it a different way doesn't mean this way is wrong. But I certainly learned a lot from writing it as a young person, and then trying to stop writing it as I was growing through my career, because I thought that I bought the lie that people won't take you seriously if you put that in your real published book. So, and I mean, people won't sometimes, but whatever. If I'm going to write it, it might as well be a book I enjoy. So I came to then seek out other writers who were doing the same thing. And it's neat to see their sliding scales of comfort and how they build their characters through it. And it's always, reading for me now becomes a study in, oh, that's cool. That's a really good idea. How could I do that my own way? Or I don't like that. I'm going to make sure that I avoid that my own way.
Evaluating what works and what doesn't from a very practical standpoint. Yeah. Back to reading. There's often the misunderstanding that, oh, if you enjoy this content in porn, you must secretly desire it, to do it or to participate in it or whatever, about, specific kinks or just tropes in general. But I don't personally find that true.
Yeah, well, I think it's a curiosity, right? And a way to explore something and examine it without committing to it with your body, which has pretty high stakes.
Well, I think, did we cut our guilty pleasure question? Maybe because we decided we weren't guilty about any of it.
Yeah,
I would say that.
But I love reading stories about not about unhealthy relationship dynamics, but that are
involve unhealthy.
Yeah. They're just so much fun to read about. Does that mean I want an abusive spouse? No.
I mean, it's like when I read these enemies to lovers fics, the people involved are often horrible, and I don't think that they in real life would have a good relationship, but you can still explore the interesting dynamics of their relationship in a way that is compelling to read about, but that would obviously be horrible to live out.
Yeah, there's a difference between reading about something and wanting that person in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
A big difference.
Sexy villains, for example.
Yeah, I don't actually want a sexy.
I love a sexy villain. I married a cinnamon roll.
Yeah.
They're not the same. It's not even in the same part of my brain. Like, I don't need that kind of trash in my life. I don't need that kind of headache, but it's still fun to read and write about. That's for sure.
The girls love bad boys.
Yeah, no.
Only on the page.
Exactly. Another thing that I have noticed about my own habits is that I tend to read more fan fiction erotica than original erotica.
There's something inherently accessible about fan fiction, the way they use tags.
Exactly.
So you can literally shop for what you're feeling like in the moment. Whereas, like, if you're looking for fantasy with sexual content, it's a crapshoot. Like, maybe you'll get it, maybe you won't, maybe it'll be cringy, maybe it won't. And I mean, certainly the same thing can be said for fan fiction, but at least they use those tags that you can sort through and go, oh no, I don't feel like that. Oh yes, I do want to look at that specifically. And I mean, it's free.
Yeah.
Like, just like there's no feeling like, oh, I bought this, I have to slog through it, or I don't know if I want to get it, I don't know if I'll like it. Fan fiction, you can just keep trawling until you find something.
There's also, for me, there's the factor of, I like to be emotionally invested in characters. Like, it's hard for me to enjoy a sex scene if I'm not emotionally invested in the characters. And so for original work, there's a lot more buildup that you need for that. Whereas with fan fiction, you can just get straight down to the porn because you already know these characters, presumably.
Although I noticed that some people prefer the fan fiction over the original universe. Like, I have read fan fiction back in the day that I hadn't even seen the original content. It's just that somebody said, oh, you really need to read this fic. And I did, and I liked it, and I liked the characters. And then I kept going. And somehow there's a familiarity there that you can just click onto just because there's less effort somehow to world build. It's just there and they're playing in the sandbox.
They get some really nice shortcuts.
Yeah.
You also, I mean, if you read enough fan fiction with the same characters, like you do build up an idea of who they are, even if it's just the fanon version of who they are and not like the actual canon version. You do still come to know them.
Yeah.
And like, for example, I read a lot of Harry Potter fan fiction, but I actually don't like the original series at all. I mean, I've never been a huge Harry Potter book person, but I still like the characters, or I like to read about the characters. I don't know if I like all of them, but
you like playing in the sandbox and kind of visiting rather than, even if you didn't like the original content. But fan fiction isn't trying to do as much world building as the original content is. Like for the series Harry Potter, for example, there's the balance of keeping the series going and keeping this going and plot consistency. And so there's a lot of noise. But if you're just looking for a pair of characters or half a dozen characters, you can zero in on them. So it just gives more options.
I kind of want to circle back to what you were saying earlier about the tagging, because I agree completely. Just having that information at your fingertips makes reading so enjoyable.
I wish we could adopt that as a marketing strategy for published books, because I would tag the heck out of my book just to let people know what they can expect.
And I wonder why that is.
Romance books are doing it. So
okay.
I mean, I feel like I've seen on Twitter recently, I've seen some promotional graphics that authors have made that include some of those like AO3 style tags.
Yeah.
Which I find super helpful.
There is an element of spoiler to them as well, which I could see publishers maybe being uncomfortable with.
Oh, but then there's us indie crowds, right?
Yeah.
Who are just in the ring no matter what. And there is some spoiler because it's like,
but sometimes I want that. Angst with a happy ending is a completely different tag from angst.
Yeah, that's true.
This is a throwback to one of our pet peeve corners, but we had to cut this conversation out of that one. At the time, we were complaining about people who don't tag their fic with everything that's in it. And the one thing that I find shows up a lot that people just don't tag for some reason is daddy kinks. I'll be reading a story and it'll be super vanilla, and then suddenly someone calls someone daddy, and I'm like, what? Where did that come from? Why did you tag it?
It's such a weird one too, because I was going to say, well, maybe they don't think it's unusual, but I'm not sure if that's normal enough for people not to think.
Well, that was my, like, I'm not upset that the kink is normalized, but it's still a pretty specific content that I would like to be aware of before I find it.
Yeah, I don't care if it shows up, but I do want it to be tagged.
I want to know, like, don't surprise me with that, please. And for some reason, that's the one that I find the most that just like pops up.
Tagged, yeah.
I'm like, why? What?
I think because it is a kink. It's not vanilla, but it's also kind of, as far on the kink scale, it's kind of more
pretty
towards
mainstream.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if it's like there's a joke threshold where it's something that people joke about so much that maybe they do just think it's what people say.
Doesn't everyone call their partner daddy during sex?
Well, I don't know about everyone,
right?
But
now I'm just imagining my husband calling me daddy during sex, and I can't stop like laughing.
See, no, there's a fixator.
What is it about that? Yeah. Anyway, that got cut in the last one because I was like, People don't want to be surprised with this content in the middle of a podcast, just like how I don't want to be surprised.
So now it's coming in. The warning applies.
Yes. We told you at the beginning. But circling back to reading versus writing smut, you, Krystle, have also written both original and fan fiction work. And so we talked a little bit about how there's shortcuts available to writers doing fan fiction. And I was just wondering what your personal experience was like between those two.
Well, there was quite a gap between, just because I started writing fan fiction and then I slowly introduced my original characters, and then I pivoted to telling my own stories. And then as I was going along and deciding, no, this is what I want to do, I want to publish, a separation happened where I would have books that I was writing to be published, so to query at the time. And then I would write other little side projects that was basically fan fiction of my own characters, because I wanted to write the content, but I figured, no one will pick me up if I'm writing this, so I'll just do it on the side. And I kept it like that for a really long time. I don't remember how old I am. Yeah, about 15 years I was doing that, where it was just two separate parts of my brain, and never the two shall meet. And then as I was writing what eventually became Brightwash, I got onto Twitter, into the indie community, and made a lot of friends. And it became obvious to me that, yep, this is something that I can do. This is a viable path for me. And it was still separate because I was afraid, partly because of the sex content, but also because that is so directly tied to my identity as a queer person, where I was writing those fanfics because I was trying to figure out my own sexuality and my own identity. And so it's all a big mess. And putting that into a book that I was going to publish was really scary, because there tends to be a lot of questions about people and their identities when they choose to write about certain things. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to talk about it. And then it was about a month before my last deadline with my last round of edits. And I was looking at this one moment where I had gone away to write a fic about my own book again. And I was like, if I'm making my career out of this, and 5 years down the line, I haven't included it, and so I can't ever include it, I'm going to regret it. Like, if this is what it's going to be, and I flinch now, I'm going to regret it. So I just did it. And that adrenaline carried me for a few months. So I kind of forgot what the question was now. So I don't know if I answered it, but they came together, let me think, in October of last year, that I finally decided, no, that's it, I'm going to do it.
So that means, because Brightwash was published in February?
Yeah.
Right?
February 18th.
So did you, and this isn't our Brightwash episode, we will have a Brightwash episode.
I need time to read it. I'm sorry.
I know. And I don't want to talk about big spoilers because Lily hasn't read it yet. But it's fantastic.
Lily's taking over.
Yeah. But I mean, I was just wondering, like, how, if you were making those sort of kind of big decisions like 5 months before you actually published, like, did you have to do a lot of changes?
Well, no, because it came in layer by layer. So the first thing that came in was the heterosex scenes. And then Angela was the one that said, if you're gonna include this much detail, why don't you just include more?
Go all in. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because I was flinching, and like I started out with detail, and then I started kind of fading away to euphemisms, and I was kind of shaky. And she was reading it, and she was like, this started really good, and then it peters off and it feels weird. And I feel like we should see the culmination of everything if you're gonna start with this much detail. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it then. And then after I did that layer, then I realized that Ishmael needed to be a more important character, because she didn't remember his name by the end of the book, and it broke my heart. which is my fault, not Angela's fault. So then I did just a layer of adding him to scenes and making his part stronger. And when I did that, all of the inherent chemistry that are between him and Toshwe just came to life, and I couldn't stop them. Settle down, guys. So then he was more involved and they were flirting with each other. And I was like, no, it's just headcanon and it'll be my little secret with myself. Tee-hee. And then it just like I said, at the last minute, like, it was like, no, if I leave this headcanon, I'm going to regret it. So then I added a couple of scenes.
I don't think that it's they don't have any sexy times though. I want them to have sexy times.
I can make promises, but I won't tell you what they are.
I was say, Krystle made a face that says, "I plead the fifth."
I refuse to answer on the grounds that I might incriminate myself. So yeah, it's in that book. It's part of their history. It's presented as something that is over. There's a kiss, and that's why I was worried why it wasn't enough, because I did not want to take away from the core romance of Toshwe and Stella, because it is really important to him and his development. And if I gave him sex with Ishmael in the course of those couple of weeks, it would massively change that dynamic. And I didn't want to take away from her, because she deserves what she gets. Like, it's been a while.
The longing.
Yeah. And right. And so it undercut what he was saying to himself about how much he loved her if he's screwing around with everybody. So it was a choice of what I wanted to say. But then at the same time, now the history is there and I can go forward and plead the fifth. But the possibilities are now there. And then it also let me just build a world where it's just normal. Like they don't think about it much. And that was really liberating too. Just the society's got their problems and each individual relationship's got their problems, but it's just an option. And that was really liberating. So I'm glad I did it, even though it was really scary.
Well, sometimes the most important things are.
Yeah, absolutely. If your own writing isn't scaring you, then you're not writing about the right things. Like, because then it's just, well, I mean, I guess that's not fair to say, because there's lots of really good.
Not as a blanket statement, but a lot of the times.
In my experience, my very favorite books and my very favorite authors are people that are putting their bleeding heart on the page, and you can feel it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
You can tell. No, you can tell when an author is passionate.
Yeah.
I think there's a really interesting, different version of, everyone has heard write what you know. But I think the better version of that is write what you want to read. Yeah,
write the book you want to read, and also write what you feel.
That's good too.
Because you can know anything. Like in this day and age, you can find out anything. And if you don't know it, you can find people who are willing to talk about it for you, either as their hobby or for pay because they're an editor. But if the emotional honesty isn't there, stuff's gonna fall flat.
Mm-hmm. You can tell what an author truly, if they truly are behind what they're writing or not, or what they truly think will bleed through onto the page, I think a lot of the times.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's filtered through the baggage of the reader as well. Like, we as writers carry our bleeding hearts with us, but readers bring their bleeding hearts to us, and sometimes they clash. So, like, it's not a guarantee that all that baggage is going to go together very well. But if you're being honest, at least you can say that you did to the world as best you could. And you can't please everyone, but at least you wrote the best book you could.
I don't know if anyone came with some words or weird or pet peeves.
Well, we had talked about, you had talked about having a pet peeve.
I already talked about one. I can talk about another one if we want.
I mean, I don't really have another pet peeve.
All right.
Unless, Krystle, do you have a smut-themed words are weird or pet peeve?
Smut words are weird. I guess it's I can spell them, but boy, do I have to get through some internalized shit to put that stuff on the page.
That would be a fun words are weird. All of the different synonyms for genitals and why some of them are bad, some of them are good.
Yeah, it's like the proper terms are not sexy, but then the sexy terms have some baggage that not everybody's going to be comfortable with. So it gets really hard, like to choose what kind of vernacular you're comfortable with. And it's a gamble whether your audience is going to come with you.
And it can really change the tone of the scene too. I think maybe less divisive than terms for genitals, but butt, ass, or bottom are all very different words.
Yeah.
I just remember, I'm pretty sure in the Sookie Stackhouse books, she always refers to her own butt as her bottom, and that just bothered me so much. It's like, she was like, yeah, I know I have a nice bottom. And I was like, I do not believe that anyone says that. If you're complimenting your own figure, I don't think you use the word bottom.
Okay, so this doesn't apply because I think Charlaine Harris is the author, right?
Yeah.
Is probably American, but I feel like if you were British, it would be less weird.
Is that maybe less weird? Okay.
I mean, maybe that's just a completely incorrect assumption that I'm making.
Generally, British people are more comfortable with body part slang than American authors and Canadian authors or readers and writers are. Like, there's something going around on Twitter right now where somebody's posted a screenshot of their editor's notes where it's like, you have a lot of occurrences of the word cunt in this novel. And as a fellow British person, I understand and I know it's funny, but we're aiming at an American audience. So let's triage these cunts a little bit and see if we can be Brits, or else none of the Americans are going to like you after this. So I would venture to say that no, bottom is not British.
When I think of bottom, I think in reference to the body part, I think Britain. Really? I don't know why.
It just sounds a little bit childish is not quite the right word.
It's not on a level with tummy, that's for sure.
No, never use the phrase tummy to refer to your grown-ass adult body part.
Even belly bugs me. Maybe not so much in casual conversation, but if it's trying to be a sexy moment, it's
belly is not a sexy word.
No, it really is. And like, that's not to shame anybody who feels they have a belly, but like, it's not.
I see it if someone wants to differentiate stomach as in the internal organ versus belly, which is the outside parts.
I guess so.
But that's only useful as a distinction if you can't tell from context which one you're talking about.
Yeah, and if you can't tell from context, then there's bigger problems going on.
Oh, what I also find very distracting is if a very clearly American or North American author suddenly sprinkles in Britishisms, like arse. Like, stop it. Like, no, don't do that.
I do that on purpose because I like to use it. Arse and shite. I guess that's not a sex word.
Is it in dialogue by any chance?
Yeah,
that's completely different. I'm talking about in narration.
Point of view, though.
Okay,
but it's just a class and a world building thing that I do on purpose.
But it makes sense in the context of your writing. Like, I think that what Lily's saying is that there's a lot of times where it doesn't actually fit with the feel.
Yeah, I'm talking about like a third person narrator just suddenly who has like no characterization at all.
Ass doesn't feel sexy, so arse is better.
Maybe. I don't know.
It is challenging, even for me as a 30 plus woman, trying to figure out what are we going to call these parts?
You almost sometimes want a word that won't get noticed.
Yeah.
Because you want them to be thinking about the content. So it's like, well, how do you pick a word that's not going to stand out?
Let me tell you, for lady parts, it is not an easy choice.
Well, Sarah earlier alluded to my smut-themed pet peeve, which is disappearing limbs.
You elaborate.
You're reading a sex scene.
Hold on. Before, you're going to have to restart that, Lily, because I wanted to ask Krystle what she was going to pour.
Ah, yes.
I'm going for the McClellan's that's hidden behind my monitor. So it's the Isla.
Oh, yeah, Isla single malt.
There we go. They have a lowland, a space side, and a highland. And I really like the space side as well, although I guess you won't like it because it's sweet. It tastes like chocolate.
I would be interested in trying it, but yeah, it's probably a little too sweet for me.
You might like it. It's not overly sweet, but it's certainly not peated. Like, it's not smoky.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I would like to try before I bought a bottle.
I would offer you some.
Alas.
Might take a while to get there.
Yeah. One of these days we're gonna have to go on a whiskey tour in Scotland. Yeah, I'm sorry, it just has to happen.
Absolutely.
Lily, I'll drag you along with me, but you probably will hate all of the whiskey.
I'll go taste it, but yeah.
We won't judge you if you don't like it. It's fine.
Yeah, I'll just be making faces the whole time.
Yeah. That's okay. You can do that. Anyway, I completely derailed us. I'm sorry. You were gonna say your pet peeve.
She's important. You got to stay on brand.
Yeah. I say we got left Krystle on that horrible cliffhanger of disappearing limbs.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm referring to a sex scene where the participants change position, and you're like, wait, no, there's supposed to be a leg there. Like, how did you do that? Like, hold on. That doesn't make sense.
As a writer of fight scenes and sex scenes, I can tell you it is really hard to track that stuff. Yeah. And it takes quite a few passes of editing to make sure that everything is continuous, because if you add something or change something, then you have to and the nature of fan fiction, like, fan fiction writers are pretty trigger happy getting their chapters up, so probably not as edited.
Yeah, there's not necessarily a lot of editing happening. There can be, but not always.
None when I was doing it.
I think you can also tell a fan fiction writer who has any writer, but I think fan fiction in particular, because it does often skew younger, not always, who perhaps are not writing what they know, to put it nicely. And you're like, oh, darling, human bodies do not fit that direction. Nice try.
I've done some of those in my day.
I mean, same.
Oh, of course. And it was also sort of an interesting growth of my own part of realizing that. Because at first, I was like, I've never noticed that kind of thing for obvious reasons.
Yes.
And then there was a turning point when I'm reading it, going,
you become more and more experienced in the subject matter.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. Hold on. Well, like, there's all of those how to write gay porn for straight women guides.
I wonder why. I mean, I know why I chose that, but I wonder why it's so common that so many, I mean, that it's a market with a need, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I have no answer, because I haven't spoken to a lot of other fan fiction writers. I know my answer. It's kind of a little personal, but I wonder why it's such a common, like, is it because there's not as many good female characters to choose from? Or is it because they're processing their own identity? Like, I don't know. Anyway, I do wonder if it's just a lack of good female characters to choose from, but then why anyway.
Well, the theory that I've read that I think makes a lot of sense to me, at least, is that the reader does not feel like they have to identify with one party or the other. If you are a straight woman reading about two gay men in a relationship, you don't feel like you're forced to pick, like, oh, I'm supposed to identify with the girl. And for a lot of young women, that can help them explore relationship dynamics.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'd buy that.
Yeah,
right. Like I read that and I was like, that does drives.
I'm thinking about it because I read a lot of like my relationship preferences in fiction, in fan fiction specifically, tend to be like gay couples. And I can see that. I think there are a lot of gender dynamics in fiction that just you kind of bypass that often when you have these gay relationships. I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, and there is historical baggage of relationships between people of two different genders that maybe you don't want to get. I mean, there is, of course, a lot of other stuff involved with same-sex relationships.
I think, Krystle, you're right when you say that it's harder to find like good female characters who stand up on their own. Like it's just easier to find
enough that you can invest them with agency.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, although I do wonder if there's a lot of people processing queer identities through
that's quite possible too.
Because there isn't a lot of actually, I can't say that because maybe I just never looked for hetero pairing. I don't remember going through and seeing a lot of male-female pairings. It's often either male pairings or female pairings. Mm-hmm. But I'm a little then,
I'm sure there have been actual like counts made though, and that same-sex male relationships outnumber any other type of relationship in fan fiction.
Oh, absolutely.
That wouldn't surprise me.
I could be talking out of my ass or my arse or my bottom.
It would be interesting to be able to talk to a lot bigger of a writing audience or writing demographic as to why they chose that, if they even knew why they're choosing that, because especially if it's young people, I bet they have no clue why they chose it.
I mean, and I'm sure it's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
Has AO3 done any like data analysis? They must have. I would love to read some of that.
I mean, what kind of, are you just talking numbers or like actual written analysis of what these trends mean?
I would like to make those interpretations myself. I just want the numbers.
And I would love to know too, if media that has queer relationships, if there's fewer fics for them, because it's just there.
Because there's more representation.
Yeah, because certainly that's why I was reading and writing fics, because at the time there just wasn't very much to choose from. So, and I felt like I was an invisible human. I was like a non-human because I wasn't represented. And then but if you go over to the fic world, now you get to be a human, you get to participate again. Mm-hmm. Whereas lately there's a lot of stuff coming out with, at least maybe it's just at the time I didn't have access to it because
something that I've noticed, like for example, and I've been reading a lot of Le Bardugo because we watched Shadow and Bone with the Friends Talking, Dylan from the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast and Sandra Gibbons.
That episode.
Yeah. And so as a group, a bunch of us got together and watched Shadow and Bone, and I decided, because I am that kind of person, that I was going to read all of Le Bardugo before watching it, which gave me about like 5 days to read 4 books. I managed. But one of the things that I really liked about it was that there were all of these different relationships that were mentioned just casually in the background and in the foreground too. I mean, like you had some of the main characters had gay relationships, but like it was prevalent but not remarked upon.
Yes, because then they just get to participate in being human.
Yeah, exactly.
And
exactly.
So you can turn to that source material to feel like you are a member of humanity.
Yeah.
Whereas others that present heteronormative and only, then I wonder if it skews to be more content from worlds where it's just not talked about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to have that sort of casual diversity represented in the source material, and then you don't necessarily have to go looking for it in the fan fiction.
Well, and that's a strategy some creators use to drum up conversation is, queer baiting and Supernatural and Teen Wolf and shows like that, where they walk that edge just to get people hyped up, but then never actually pay it off.
Well, I often wonder if people lower down on the creative team are wanting it, and people higher up are saying, no, we can't. We're not going to do it.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. The writing team, I wonder if it's not so much that they're doing it on purpose to drum people up, but just that, the writers and the creators are wanting to have it in, but then as you go up the ladder in the production teams, they're cutting it back again.
It becomes a game of how far can we go?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a good point. And I mean, on something like a TV show, there are so many more people involved in the creation versus a book.
Yeah. A lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, having zero experience on the creation of a media like that, I assume it makes things more complicated, but I don't know.
I think that's a pretty safe guess. Yeah.
So, Krystle, thank you so much for coming on. Can you please share your social media? Like, where can you be found on the internet?
Okay, so I'm on Twitter mostly, just at Krystle Matar. I am also on Instagram at Krystle Matar. My website is krystlematar.com. I'm really cashing in on the unusual name.
Hey, I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah. I think that's all I have. I want to say that's all I have.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye!
Bye!